Collins?
Yeah.
Hey there, welcome to episode number 25 of Killer POV. I'm one of your co-hosts, Rob G. from Icons of Fright and FEARnet. And joining me as always is Rebekah McKendry from Fangoria.
Hello, how are you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
I'm drinking hot chocolate.
I see him wanting to chime in already, so I better get to his intro before.
Somebody told me that improves brain functionality.
It does.
I don't remember where I heard that.
I'm 8% smarter than you guys today.
And I'm probably 8% dumber for drinking this Heineken you passed to
No,
me.
you're not, because I brought it, and that was a very wise decision.
That was like
That's Elric Kane from Inside Horror and New Zealand.
Oh, I represent New Zealand in all things filmic.
And drinker of all my beer every week.
That's me.
So that's fine.
Thank
and we're really excited. We got a really special guest, and we just wanted to bring him right on to tackle our topic of the week. The legendary cinematographer, Dean Cundey. Hey, Dean.
Hey there.
Hi.
It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming by. And of course, we decided that one of our most popular episodes was our Shout Factory, Scream Factory episode, where we had Jeff Nelson on. And since his favorite movie is The Fog, we have brought Jeff back. What's up, Jeff?
Hey, guys. How are you?
All right.
Good to be
welcome
back.
Glad to have you back, Jeff.
And he brought presents.
He did.
That should be noted.
He brought me Dolph Lundgren.
Oh, wow. Dolph Lundgren?
I got Dolph Lundgren.
I'm jealous of
it's
that,
awesome.
You know, I'm just happy that we're talking about The Fog. Every time I think, okay, well, this campaign is done, I'm like, oh, no, I'm still talking about it. That's great.
Yeah.
I could never get tired of it.
Yeah, that's how we lure Jeff back. We're going to talk about The Fog. Yeah, I'm there.
It's definitely the best, least talked about Carpenter film, in my opinion.
I agree.
Probably because of the release, I would assume.
Yeah.
But I only ever saw it on VHS, until now, so it's exciting.
Well, you got to get our Blu-ray.
It
It looks
beautiful.
fantastic.
Okay.
And thanks to this man over here, Mr.
Of course.
Cundey.
I'm very pleased with the way it came out. I mean, so often I look at reissues of something I've worked on, and they don't ask me to come and comment or consult.
Shocking.
And
it's shocking.
Shocking.
Well,
you should be.
Should get a first phone call,
right,
damn it.
Exactly.
Well, and on the first release, when you make the film, one of the tasks I have is to go and approve the color timing, the look of the film when making a film print. So now that they're re-releasing on this wonderful new, format, Blu-ray, you'd wonder why, I'm not always invited. So, but I was delighted to be invited to work on this and to recreate as much as I could the look of the original.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm going to assume that if you're listening to the show, you know who Dean is, but just in case, if you don't, he shot probably all of your favorite John Carpenter movies: Halloween, The Fog,
Escape from New York,
The Thing. He did
Big Trouble in Little China, a film that can never be forgotten. Way ahead of its
He
time.
pretty much shot my childhood.
Yeah.
It was like Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Did I see Romancing the Stone
Romancing
in there?
Stone, we're just talking about.
I'm going to throw in Psycho 2.
Psycho
Yeah.
2 for
Wow.
sure.
Oh, yes.
And then a little film, one of the smaller films towards the end called Jurassic Park.
Yeah, that one. Yeah,
That's kind of a throwaway. I wouldn't.
I did that one.
I'm going to give you a couple titles you probably didn't.
So he was there for all those, and it's amazing the body of work you've amassed, and one of the things I think has been exciting in the last year or so, I feel like there's been this big revival of a lot of the John Carpenter stuff, the early stuff that you worked on.
Thanks to a little bit of Scream Factory.
Of course, Factory
but
definitely kicked it off.
But it is interesting because, we've released They Live, The Fog, Prince of Darkness, as you know, is coming out in October. But Warner Brothers is putting out In the Mouth of Madness.
Yeah.
There was. We're also putting out Assault on Precinct 13. Maybe it is all Scream Factory. No.
Yeah, but there's also Anchor. You just supervised a brand new transfer of Halloween.
Oh, yeah.
Which I think is really exciting for Anchor Bay.
Yes.
Yeah. How did that go?
That went very well too. I mean, it's great to see something after having looked at DVDs and VHSs and all that. To see something where somebody takes the effort to recreate it the way we originally intended.
So I would say you're a big fan of the Blu-ray format in general.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's certainly closer to having the film in your living room than previous ones. So I like it very much.
Wow. Now, I mean, obviously for us, we grew up on these films, but a quick question on mine is, when did you, I mean, you've always been consistently busy in your career and always working from one project to the next, but when did you get an inkling that some of those early films that you did with John kind of were special to a lot of people? I mean, did you feel like they were special while you were making them, or because I feel like his career is like the films are always more appreciated almost like 10 years later to the dates.
Completely.
Especially some of your super early work, like The Witch Who Came from the Sea and Satan's Cheerleaders and the Ilsa film. I mean, these are ones that they had to sit with people. Rock and Roll High School. They had to sit for a little bit before they got really famous.
And it's kind of rewarding to see that, because so often you'll work on something and it disappears. But to have these films resurface and have a lot of people come up and say, "Wow, it was a really important film to my childhood," and of course, I wasn't a child at the time, so that makes me an old guy now. But to have those kind of things, the satisfaction I have of going into a video store, Walmart, somewhere, and seeing one or more of my films on the rack there means that there's a certain longevity to it, that somehow they touched an audience. And, I like to think it was always a collaboration that did that, that was a lot of the right people at the right place at the right time to do stuff that maybe hadn't been done before. I mean, Halloween certainly was a new genre at the time. There'd always been horror films, Frankenstein, Dracula, that kind of stuff. And then they resurfaced in the, I guess, late 50s, early 60s when atomic energy was mutating crabs and things like that, So,
but this was on your front lawn, coming into your house. Different story, right?
Yeah, it was different, and that was late at night after I'd been out for a while. No, but we'll talk about that later. To be part of a new kind of film that then gets well received by an audience, they appreciate it. And we didn't know it at the time because, when the film was made, John and Deborah had written it, and they'd been told by Mustafa, I think, the producer, that he wanted a film that involved babysitters being killed on Halloween. And they said, "Well, that sounds interesting. Do you think these babysitters?" I don't care. Babysitters being killed on Halloween. I'll see you around. So
that's fine.
We were really given sort of autonomy, which was spoiling at the time because a lot later, when I started doing studio films, and when John got involved in them, there was a lot more oversight. But we were able to just sort of go off and make this movie, and I look back with a great deal of fondness of doing it because John was the first director I worked with who was interested in using the camera to tell the story, visual storytelling, and that's what I was interested in, and so many of my previous films had been done with by directors who were interested in using the camera to record actors talking, and then to use a couple of cameras to record something blowing up, and then some girls showering, and then and it was fairly simplistic stuff. And John wanted to tell a story and emotionally involve the audience, and I had a great deal of satisfaction and enjoyment out of realizing that we were going to be able to do that.
Even making the character the camera. itself.
Exactly, making the audience, and using the new device at the time, the Steadicam, that allowed you to move the camera very smoothly and in ways that hadn't been done before. I mean, we were really one of the first movies to use it, especially in a creative storytelling way, and to make the audience become part of the film, moving through the story and amongst the characters. So it was definitely a very rewarding experience.
One thing I wanted to ask is you were just talking about longevity of your career and how that's rewarding, and the thing that jumps out at me must be with Blu-ray and DVD, how rewarding it must be those films that weren't acknowledged at the time, and two that I love that I know you have made, The Thing being, now I really rank it as, to me, maybe the best horror film ever made, or Western horror, and then also Halloween 3, which is a film that no one understood or cared for, and now has a resurgence. I saw the extra features you guys did, which were great. It's a great release too. But that must be also a totally different feeling. A film that just wasn't received well, and then suddenly people love it. That must be interesting.
Well, and I think Halloween sort of epitomizes that, because I remember when we made it, it was released. The first week it didn't do really well. And people said, well, okay, it was a nice try. And the second week, more people came, a larger audience. The third week, even more. And suddenly it was obvious that it wasn't about the advertising. It was about the word of mouth. It was about people really appreciating and understanding the film. So that's one of the things I think was led to a lot of our satisfaction, was the fact that not only then was there an audience that was finding it and appreciating it, but the fact that it sits in almost everybody's video store somewhere means that people, it touched people in a dark and sinister way.
I mean, I still to this day don't really understand, because I wasn't there at the time, why The Thing was received the way it was. I mean, I can't. That must be one of the biggest comebacks of any film in the history of cinema in terms of critical thinking.
What was the same summer as E.T., if I'm not mistaken?
It was, yeah.
So that's,
Yeah, they basically was blaming E.T. for no one wants to see this stuff. The other thing, too, is The Thing was so different. There are no female characters in it. It's all male cast. It was very gory. At the time, John's films were sort of understated. The Fog and Halloween have violence, but there's not a whole lot of gore. But The Thing, as you know, just went over the top. And it's funny because it's really ahead of its time now. You look at those effects, but I remember as a kid watching those and going, whoa, there's too much. You know what I mean? I think, John's films, Prince of Darkness, They Live are other ones I think I cite as finding their audience much, much later too. I don't know, there's just something, well, as you said, magical about the people that were all there, collaborative, all coming together. But, got to tell you, Mr. Cundey, it's all about the visuals too. I mean, it's like,
That's the way I'd like to think about it. But no, it is really, it's a case of collaboration and John clearly being able to see how to, build suspense and suck an audience in. That's what, because it's one of those things that I've always sort of expounded, which is not original with me, but I'll repeat it anyway, is that that an audience goes for an emotional experience. They don't say, well, hey, let's go see a movie that examines the frailty of the human condition, or holds up to a mirror the relationship between men and women in an amusing way. They say, well, let's go find something we can laugh at, something that'll scare us, something that's thrilling, and it's all evaluated by the emotion that they want to experience. And the success of the film is about how much the emotion, that the film can create in the audience. And I think that's, true of certainly the John's films and a lot of them that I've had the pleasure of working on. we were able to find a way to, touch the audience emotionally.
Mm-hmm. But out of curiosity, did you ever see the newer version of the thing? Because actually, I interviewed Dean for the bonus features on Psycho Legacy, and what I remember at the time was you. I think you had said you inquired about it because you thought you were curious about maybe wanting to revisit that when they were getting ready to do the prequel.
Yeah, I did see the film eventually, and it was it looked like it tried to answer some of what people thought, the fact that it was all guys in the original movie. Mm-hmm. Let's add a girl.
A 21-year-old scientist.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was my problem.
A very attractive 21-year-old scientist.
I had no problem with the attractive, just the 21-year-old.
Yeah. So, they did a lot of computer monster work,
which they didn't start out with it like that, because Woodruff at ADI, they had done everything practical, and the studio then said, "Nope, we don't like it," and they redid every bit of it digitally.
Yeah,
that's right. That actually. Sorry.
Oh, they ended up putting the practical stuff that they made. They ended up putting in a haunted house at Halloween Horror Nights, Universal's Halloween Horror Nights.
Really? Man.
See, that's amazing to me, because when you guys were making the original thing, did you have the studio like on your back about the effects and what you were doing, or did they pretty much leave you alone while you were making the film?
Well, John, I think, enjoyed a certain autonomy. There was a trust, and the thing was my first studio movie, you might say, that we actually shot at a studio at Universal, and so I had expected a lot more, oversight, you might say. We were really sort of given, a free hand, and I guess they felt, well, John and all of us sort of knew what we were doing in this particular genre, and so I got spoiled for quite a while, because the autonomy that we started with Halloween, and subsequently had in the other movies, which then followed through when I was working on Spielberg movies, because, who tells Steven what to do? So I had thought, well, I guess that's the way you make movies. And then later, there were other events where the studio said, well, but where are the close-ups? That kind of stuff in that exact voice. I really enjoyed the fact that we were given that freedom by a major studio. We had the facilities of a major studio, big stages and set construction and a reasonable budget. The fact that we could do production value by shooting the helicopter opening sequence up in Alaska, as opposed to doing it as blue screen or green screen or whatever would be required now. The fact that we were able to build the compound exterior set up in Stewart, British Columbia, up on a rock hilltop overlooking a glacier, and so we had a lot of production value and flexibility as far as how we would accomplish it, and so it was, of course, disappointing when the audience didn't appreciate that either.
How much of your work is dictated by especially the previs of a film is dictated by the effects? So going in what kind of practicals they were going to use for the thing. How much of how you then design the lighting and mood of the film stems from that?
Well, the practical creature stuff being done by Rob Bottin was really pretty innovative at the time. I mean, and
still is.
I'm still to this day trying to figure out how they do the hand biting.
Yeah, the arms.
Yeah.
I will never figure that out. I mean, like now when they did something very, very similar in the new one, and I was able to point and go like, oh, digital. But the original, it still boggles my brain.
Well, and I've been sworn to secrecy.
Bottin.
But
it's on a DVD.
It was
damn.
But it was really a great sort of experience to see the fact that Rob was so invested in creating new and unusual stuff, and that I took a great deal of effort to collaborate with him on, for instance, what's the best part of this particular creature sculpture, and how do you light that and let the other parts be dark and so forth, just to create the mood around all the creature work.
I mean, did you have any doubts looking at some of the stuff that Rob was doing? Because, I mean, there was nothing like it at the time, especially in horror movies, where we were like, oh, wow, this is unique and cool and different. I mean, it's so different from the original thing before that, so. Yeah,
it was a case of stuff that, well, I had never worked with before, as had very few people, I guess. But also of a feeling like, well, it is so completely different. Maybe we're onto something here. So, we all just jumped in with all 4 feet.
Nice. Cool. Thankfully.
Yeah, exactly. That really did spark that and American Werewolf in London, which I think were the same year, correct?
Thing was at 1 year after.
Thing was 82. Yeah. American Werewolf was 81. You're right. Yeah. So yeah, that really did spark, the big effects boom of the 1980s were within those 2 films. And then after that, it just took off. So.
Yeah.
But I imagine there must be a big difference between CG shooting, as a cinematographer shooting CG and lighting for CG, something that's not there, versus the practical effects.
Yeah,
right?
I noticed that you shot Garfield. I was interested to know what it was like to shoot a character that wasn't there. I'm fascinated by it. Because I mean, in The Thing, everything, including the effect, is already on screen. What do you do when your primary character doesn't even exist?
Well, that is it's the flip side of creature work or whatever you'd call it. I mean, Roger Rabbit, there was no... There was no Roger. I hope I'm
Oscar nom. Not to drop it, but just there was an Oscar nom for that particular film. For you.
Oh yes, yeah. Now I remember.
Yeah, that's right.
But I hope I'm not bursting your bubble, buddy. Explaining that there was no Roger Rabbit.
Oh, nice.
They had the little baby play the rabbit and all.
No, so I'm sorry if you've been disillusioned.
As long as there's a Jessica Rabbit, we're good. Everything else can fall.
I'm sorry to tell you.
So wait, did the flubber not exist either? Because if that's the case, I'm out of here.
Yeah, well, so to get back to the original thought, which is how do you shoot stuff that isn't there? It really takes a kind of a mindset about it, because you have to. A camera operator, for instance, reacts to what he sees in the frame, how he composes it, how he pans the camera and stuff. And when there's nothing there, he has to imagine it. The actors the same way; they have to be able to imagine. And if they don't know what it's going to look like because there's only artists' renderings, in the case of Jurassic Park, for instance, it takes a great deal of skill for an actor to create the illusion, and also for us to say, well, if the character really existed, how would we shoot this shot? And not just a static shot to allow the creature to be placed in there, but how do you pan the camera if the creature really walked? And, how do you make the interaction with the set, the environment, real? So in Jurassic Park, for instance, in the kitchen sequence, which is, one of my favorites, we looked for ways to make the creatures, the raptors, interactive. So I had them put pots and pans on top of the counter, and then we pulled them off with wire so that the animators could, make the dinosaur interact with the environment. So a lot of it is just saying to yourself, if it really was there, how would you do it? How would you compose it? Would you move the camera? Would you, and if the light was coming from there, what would it look like? So now you have to give that information to the animation and technical guys.
Wow.
It seems, and you also, the three major directors you've worked with so much seem to be three with huge imaginations. Zemeckis obviously has a huge imagination. Spielberg, I'm sure, is unparalleled.
Yeah, and again, that's sort of one of my great satisfactions is to have been involved with guys who do that, who have a great imagination, as opposed to, recording actors talking. So,
right.
Interested in furthering the art in illusion. And illusion is one of the things that drew me into film in the first place. How do you create it? So I naturally gravitated to that.
I got to tell a story really quick, but when I did interview him for Psycho Legacy, I went to his house very nervously, and the greatest thing was we shot your interview, I think, in like your one of your offices, but you walk in and it's like he's got like the McFarlane Michael Myers figure, followed by the little Thing figure. And then there's like a toy DeLorean in the corner. And then a framed picture of you and Steven Spielberg with a freaking dinosaur. And a hand-drawn Garfield. It's just like, oh my God. See all stuff. And then I think we had a problem with the camera, and you came up and took a look like, oh, let me see. So I was like, oh my God, I'm working with Dean Cundey. He's composing my shot. I've actually worked with him.
You're a camera assistant now, Rob.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny.
So yeah, why don't we talk a little bit about influences and stuff? Because obviously for us, we were very young, seeing a lot of your early work. So what were some of the things? I mean, just getting into cinematography, what were the films that kind of got you interested in that? What are the things that you think look amazing that kind of sparked this interest?
I think my interest started very early. I remember as a kid, 12 years old or so, going to the Saturday matinees. My mother would drop us off with 3 or 4 of my friends back in the days when it was safe to do that. And, there was a Disney film and 20 cartoons and all of that stuff. And again, I was fascinated by the illusion. And I think one of the first films that I remember doing that was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the Disney film. And I was fascinated by the fact that the design of the sets, the design of the submarine itself was so really smart, very brilliant. It's still one of the best production design jobs, I think. But the fact that, you just bought into this world. And yet I knew in the other half of my brain that it was all phony. That wasn't a real submarine. So that I think sparked my interest in it. And so I think that's when I knew I wanted to somehow get into the film business, the art of film. I didn't know exactly what. Early on, it was production design. And then later, when I was at UCLA, or just before, I changed my focus to cinematography. No pun intended. Well, maybe it was. So, because I felt those were the guys who were dynamically involved with creating the illusion on the set. So UCLA, I just decided that's what I wanted to do. As far as other influences, it's hard to say that there was anybody that specifically. I always liked Conrad Hall's work.
Oh, wow.
In
The Sadist. Or I'm sorry, that's Arch Hall. Conrad Hall is not.
No.
Wrong film.
Oh, sorry.
Conrad Hall's the that last shot of the one with Robert Blake where he's killed he's the cop, the short cop. What is the name of that one? And it just keeps coming back. The camera just keeps going back and back, revealing him dead on the road. Trying to think.
Well, he did The Professionals, which was a really interesting Richard Brooks take on a Western.
Lee Marvin?
Yeah. Lee Marvin and Robert Ryan. And also the the Road to Perdition, Day of the Locusts. A lot of really interesting sort of edgy kinds of films.
Electric Light and Blue, sorry.
Yeah.
And I'm not looking at my phone, so.
I am.
I just remember.
He did Marathon Man, and that makes me happy.
Yeah. And also with Robert Blake in Cold Blood.
Yeah. Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah, Cool Hand Luke was one of my favorites in film school.
I'm texting people. I just happen to know he did Cool Hand. I'm kidding. I'm looking at him on my phone.
I think that speaks to what you're saying about emotion, though. Those are all those titles we're listing are motion pictures. They're ones where they have found the like even in Cold Blood, the water running down. And these aren't just trick effects. They were to make you feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is something.
So, but I think I also would have to say, rather than liking any one particular, guy or particular film, I always felt that there were particular films that were just well done. And, the same guy could work on, shoot some film that wasn't well done, and you'd say, well, they didn't take advantage of his talent or whatever. And yet there are others where, again, everybody, collaborated. So, which is, I think why I appreciate, so many of the films I worked on, because it gave everybody on that particular film a chance to, do something that was, beyond what everybody had thought it might be.
Were there any of John's films that you didn't shoot, even though you shot the majority? Were there any that you wish you could have at the time, or for some reason had conflicts or scheduling?
Well, I always thought Starman was a good John film.
Right.
That would have been, I think, fun.
Yeah.
But no, I'm very appreciative of the ones I did work on, because they were sort of early in his career and my career, certainly, and gave us all a kickstart.
Did John ever cite other horror films to kind of influence how you would shoot a picture? Did he ever say, "Hey, look at this"?
Yeah, John was a big fan of Howard Hawks. So sometimes before beginning, we would review, Howard Hawks movie and His Girl Friday.
Oh, that's a great one. That's everyone speaks so fast in that film. I can't even keep up.
No, that was a very conscious effort on Hawks' part. And John said, well, that's how I'm going to have the girls speak in Halloween.
That makes so much sense now.
Cool. Yeah.
I just looked at it as always just gabby females gossiping, but having related it to His Girl Friday now, that makes perfect sense.
No, because, rather than saying, okay, you say a line and then you wait and then you say the line and then you wait and you say your line, it was sort of like, how do I make it look real with people just jumping in with their next thought before their friend has finished theirs. So yeah, it was, I think that was a very, brilliant decision that really sort of affected the, the whole feeling about Halloween and a certain sense of reality, as opposed to a movie with, actors talking. It was, a slice of life feeling that it could really be happening to these babysitters on Halloween.
They weren't generic tropes like they often are now. They're just like stock characters who are thrown into a good-looking kids from the WB who are saying the same thing.
Yeah, no, they were, there was a real effort to make them, seem honest and real.
Were there any of the films that any of the horror films that you did that you were maybe surprised by how it came out afterwards? I mean, the only reason I ask is because something like The Fog, for example, I know John had said it just didn't work when they first tried to cut it together. It took a little effort to kind of, add a few more things and then the score and all that. So was there anything that you worked on that you thought, I don't know if this is working, and then you saw it and were kind of like, oh, wow, it came together beautifully on everyone's part?
Yeah, well, I think The Fog was one because I remember looking at the first cut and John said, I'm going to show this to you, but just so you know how we're going to fix it. Because in the original version, the fog shows up and people disappear into it.
Oh, interesting. I've never heard that. And I've heard everything about the fog. So many people, when we put out the release, were like, oh, can you get that footage of the original version? So just hearing that people just simply disappeared into the fog, that's
well, the realization was that, we've all disappeared into some fog at some point or other, and we came out the other side. What happens in there? So John and Deborah decided that, and is evident in a lot of horror films subsequently, was that people needed to see the threat of death.
Yep.
You have to kill somebody. So obviously early on in Scream, Drew Barrymore has to die, and that sets the tone and the the danger for the characters. So what we went back and shot was the evidence of death, and in order to make it a little more scary.
I know about the post scenes, about the adding of the graphic gore scenes and stuff like that, but there are a lot of scenes in the fog that are just very visually beautiful, that are very quiet and understated, and I'm just curious, I assume that those were in the original cut, but there's a shot of, the corpse goes after Jamie Lee Curtis and falls down on the ground and scribbles 3, and then the foghorn starts airing, and there's shots of, Antonio Bay, and it's coastal foggy, and it's so beautiful. I just, that was in the original cut, I'm assuming.
The whole coastline of and the lighthouse, all of that was stuff that we looked at and said, "Well, this is really beautiful stuff." And the idea, I think, was to create the contrast between the seemingly peaceful, idyllic place, and then what was going to ensue. So, it was fun to work in an area where we were able to make it look good as part of the story, as opposed to, a haunted house that always has to be creepy.
Well, and again, with Halloween, where everything is pretty much shot in a house and it's claustrophobic, with a fog, you just had so much more of a canvas to play with. It, that beautiful lighthouse and the stairs going down it, and just the shots of the town and everything like that. Was that the first film? Did you follow the fog right after Halloween, or do you remember? Was there anything in between there? Because going from, again, a claustrophobic, low budget to, we're going to go to the phones.
I was looking it up. I think John did.
Maybe because I
was looking up the order of.
I think John did Elvis right after that. No, wasn't that after
Elvis? Was at the same sort of time. Did you do Elvis?
No, I didn't, because it was a studio film, and the studio said the cinematographer who. Never heard of him. So he had a.
Well, now they've heard
studio.
Of you,
yeah, they know you now.
And that's a great film, but the weakest part is probably the way it looks. It's actually a really strong performance, Elvis, but it does look a bit like a TV movie in a sense,
I just, I guess you and John both, you understood the Panavision. You use every frame. One of the things that was very jarring, I think, to a lot of people is we grew up on Halloween, The Fog, Escape from New York on VHS rentals, which were cropped or full frame. Oh, yeah. We didn't know any better. And then Laserdisc and DVDs and Blu-rays came out, and we saw information on the sides that were just like, oh, the ghost comes out from there. I never saw that before. Or, oh, Michael comes out from behind the car. You
should listen to our Mike Williamson episode. It's the geekiest thing about this I've ever heard.
Film formats and cropping.
It's just one formats.
But those John's films, and especially the early ones that you worked on, you're using all of your frame, and so especially when you're seeing them in the theater, when they're New Beverly or something like that's reviving them. Your eyes are always looking around because you have so much, because you're using it. And I just think that that's one of many things that we appreciate of the fans is wow, you cared about your space.
And that's, again, in the original release, which obviously was that format, that's what created, a lot of the suspense and terror. What's lurking in that dark area over there,
right.
And it was very, very consciously, composed and shot that way, and which was so disappointing when, it came out on early video releases,
sure.
and they were panned and scanned, and people, they still reacted, but they didn't realize. It wasn't until I went to a screening recently where, people would come up and say, well, I've only seen this as a kid on TV. I was amazed at how much more, and people don't realize by not letterboxing a film, you really are altering the movie.
Totally.
People say, oh, well, we're just cutting out some of the crap on the sides.
No.
Can I say crap?
Say whatever you want, man.
Okay. So it was a sad thing to realize that there were all these, television stations, I guess, or whoever it was, even the commercial people who said, well, no, the audience complains that they're not seeing all the movie because it's black on the top and the bottom.
Yeah.
And you say, well, no, you're not seeing all the movie if you put the image all the way to the top and bottom. So, it was very sad to see not only the things that I had worked on, but so many films that were badly represented and then not seen and appreciated by an audience because, their only exposure was on DVDs or VHS. So, which is why I like very much the fact that Turner Classic Movies and some of these places present it in the original format. And now you can get, the Blu-rays and stuff in the original format. Yeah. People are somehow realizing now that the black stuff on the top and bottom doesn't matter. It makes your experience so much better.
Well, and the shape of TVs changed. And
thank God for widescreen TVs.
Yeah,
big time.
It took them long enough. I mean, when I was working at a video store when they first introduced widescreen videos and just explaining to people the black bars.
Yeah. I remember my mom complaining about them. We were watching something when I was in high school, and she was like, I don't understand. I don't like this.
I worked at New Line Home Video for years when DVD was first starting, and we would constantly have to put out widescreen and full screen versions because many, Walmart shoppers would come back and complain, well, these black bars and everything like that. And it's just like, oh, that's so sad. But
took them like 20 years, but everybody.
We should talk to Mike Williams.
It's supposed to look like that, I think of, God, all these Carpenter and De Palma films or whatever. Like, can you imagine just not seeing
I can't.
Scope.
Somebody told me a story once about Billy Wilder watching at the end of his career, watching a transfer of one of his films, and you see two people at the door, and they're talking, and Billy Wilder starts crying, and somebody asked him what's wrong. He said the main character is off to the side watching them have a conversation, and he's no longer in the shot. Yeah, the whole film is different. It doesn't make any sense anymore, and they didn't care. It's just gone. That's the movie now.
In The Fog, there's a simple shot. The babysitter, Mrs. Coberts, is coming in for the first time to the Stevie Wayne house. She's coming in from one door over here, and Andy is clearly on the left end over here in frame. And it's you have both sides of the house. And again, on VHS, I never saw either one of them, or it was a scan or whatever like that. It was just so different seeing it on widescreen, full 235 for the first time. Right. I'm just glad that I know that I've seen in interviews before that the idea of Panavision came out. Basically, it makes a low-budget movie look like a bigger budget film, and I would say John Carpenter films for sure looked more handsome.
And also we had decided early on, and it was an argument that I tried to make for other directors and producers that aspect ratio, the Panavision aspect ratio, was an enhancement to the storytelling, and because there would be, producers who would say, yeah, but, you've got all this space to the side. The human face should fill the frame. And you say, well, no, Why do they all have that voice?
I've heard that a million
times. But you say, well, no. The idea is you make use of that space. You use it to fill the frame with the environment, or to scare people or build the suspense, make them uneasy. Because by composing a shot with the actor, the character way off to one side, the audience is now conditioned to say, well, what am I supposed to expect over there? And if you don't scare them, at least you've created the apprehension. Absolutely. So you can scare them later.
Does that come a little, does John's love of Panavision also come a little bit from his love of Westerns, using the whole scope? Or
Yeah, I think so. I mean, our early conversations about it was the fact that he loved Westerns. He loved the big expansive shots and the production value that it offered. So, and it was a relatively easy way to add production value to a lot of films, but also to fill the frame with a lot more stuff. But you also had to be able to think of all that stuff. So if it was a director who wasn't used to that, they were used to thinking, well, it's a close-up of the actor. What am I going to do with all this space? It's all, wasted or distracting or something. And no, you rethink your shot and you put your other character over there, or you put something about the environment over there and use it. Mm-hmm. So,
quick question on the John Carpenter films. I think this would be interesting. But out of the ones that you did, which one would you say was your most challenging? You make it sound like they're easy. I mean, they look easy when we watch them, but then, we just talked about the locales for the fog or the studio interference, things like that. Was there anyone that was particularly like, boy, this is kind of a bear to get through?
Well, I'd never say I was, this is a bear to get through. It was always a great, pleasurable challenge.
That's great.
And so I welcomed that. I welcomed the opportunity to try new things, and John was certainly about that. But the thing was logistically probably one of the most complex of John's films, because we were up in a glacier research camp for the first stuff, living in wooden huts, that were normally lived in by glacier geeks, and eating food that was flown up by helicopter, and so we had a chance to experience what it was like to do that. But at the same time, it was different than what you're used to either in your everyday life or what you do. What would be done now, is you'd build that on a green screen and or send the second unit up to shoot some helicopter flying or whatever. So it was probably logistically the most tricky, but by virtue of that, also one of the most rewarding.
Is it? Sorry.
Cool. Oh, I have to tell this story then, because I went to a very traditional film school, and we watched a lot of Italian realism and a lot of French cinema and way too much Truffaut, except for the cinematography unit of my freshman year intro to film class. We watched The Thing, and I remember the test, and I remember that one of the questions was about the cinematography of The Thing, and I wrote my answer on the fade to white that you do in The Thing, and so it's resonated enough that it's now teaching a whole new generation of people what you're supposed to do when you direct photography.
Right. No, I'm very flattered by that observation. The fact that because I went to a relatively conventional film school, also UCLA, at the time. The effort, because I remember going to a teacher and saying, for my film, I'd like to get a, this, or we'd like to edit with this or whatever. I mean, he'd say, "Well, don't worry about that. This is not a trade school." And their interest was in, creating the next poet of the silver screen. So, again, we watched Truffaut and all this new wave stuff, and you know, it was all about the truth and honesty of the filmmaking, and you say, well, that may be, but there's an awful lot of people who go, you know, and watch other movies, and hopefully those are the kind of movies that we'll, you know, get a chance to do.
Mm. Oh yeah, there's a balance. Zalewski once said cinema should be like a peacock's tail. Mm. I always like that because there's a place for everything, all the different colors. You know? And I think your career, I mean, the fact that when I came in here and I started talking to you about Romancing the Stone, and then we're going to sit here and talk about the thing kind of shows that. I was going to ask you about shooting in real locations versus the studio with the fog. Is like, how hard is it to control a real place? This is a real I mean, in my opinion, this next to Bodega Bay and what Hitchcock got out of this, I think this is the best use of a location to feel like you really feel the place.
Totally. You feel like you're in a town. Yeah. I guess that's the thing about, you know, we asked a question on Scream Factory Facebook like a while ago, like, you know, if you could visit one fictional town in a horror film, what would it be with no leaning whatsoever? And Antonio Bay was easily number one, ahead of Haddonfield, you know, but like very big, because I think that with the visuals and stuff and what you were saying, the locales, you really feel like that's a town, you know? Yeah. I mean,
well, and I think, you know, to answer your question about shooting real locations, that the greatest challenge is always trying to control that environment, the light, you know, it's always about how do you make the environment fit what you're hoping it's supposed to look like in the film, and you know, it's tricky because you have to shoot a scene over a period of a whole day. The sun moves, the clouds come and go, you know, the light changes, and you're hoping that somehow you can control it. You put actors under big giant silk diffusion frames and so forth in order to sort of create amount of control. But it's really about you know, learning how to manipulate that stuff, and also the director being on board with that to accommodate. You know, when you say, well, let's shoot this in the morning and this in the afternoon, him being able to say, well, that's sure, no problem. Will it make it look better? Yes, well, then let's do that. As opposed to saying, well, no, the truth of the character needs to, you know, be, and you'd say, well, if the light is distracting or the audience is, you know, distracted by something, then the truth of the character doesn't matter. It's, you know, you've defeated what you're hoping to do.
And plus, you must have all the happy accidents of locale and things and light hitting things that aren't being controlled because you're not in a studio. So do you find you're somebody who's pretty open to that?
Yeah, and the other side of it is that you look for those kinds of situations and accidents. You know, of the sun in a particular place throws a really interesting shadow, and you put that behind your character, and you know, so it's about you know, the reason you know, the studios have big sound stages and would build sets was to control, to be consistent about a scene or whatever, and you know, to give yourself the control of being able to remove a wall from a set so that you know, you could put the camera somewhere you couldn't, and to, you know, really give yourself the control of the storytelling.
I know that's probably impossible to answer because I would assume you consider all your films kind of your babies, all the ones you've worked on. But is there a favorite if you're about to work with somebody or somebody asks, well, let me see what you do? Is there one that you're like, this is what I do. Watch this movie. This is my work right here.
Well, I always find that hard to, you know, because each film has a certain something that I, you know, problem solving or you know, the creation of the illusion that actually worked, you know, and you know that you know, it wasn't done as it is now by the computer, but by everybody working in a particular effort, you know, to create it. So different films for different reasons. There's certain ones that you know, I I look back fondly about, Halloween being one of them because it was an innovative film. Jurassic Park because, again, it was innovative. Nobody had made a photorealistic creature in the computer prior to that.
Have you seen the 3D version of that? Were you involved in that at all?
No, they didn't call me, but they
saw it.
I did see it. I bought a ticket. They didn't invite me to the. But anyway, no.
You were lucky enough to work with the greatest actor in the world from New Zealand.
Sam Neill.
Sam, yeah.
No show goes by without Possession or Sam Neill.
Every episode, Sam Neill comes up.
He is one of my favorite.
We haven't talked about Dress to Kill yet, so it's probably coming when we talk about our faves. He said
De so I figured it was coming.
It's coming.
Yeah, but the whole process of the photorealistic creatures was invented by ILM for Jurassic Park. Now, of course, you can do it on your Mac in your, mother's basement or wherever you are staying. Jurassic Park for that. I guess I sort of look at the ones that were somehow innovative. Roger Rabbit, because nobody had composited animated characters in that way. Yes, it had been done before since the beginning of animation, and Disney started off with his little studio with a live action girl in an animated world. So, and then they did Mary Poppins and all of that. But we deliberately pushed the envelope past what we were told was possible, and again developed and invented ways to do it. So I think I'd have to say Jurassic Park and Roger Rabbit. Halloween, I didn't know that, and others.
No, it's tough.
Those are.
Any one of those three.
Any one of those three.
You could throw him Back to the Future.
I was actually,
my favorite.
Around the room. Favorite Dean Cundey shot movie. Go, Elric.
That Thing.
The Thing.
Death Becomes Her.
Wow.
Oh,
really?
I didn't know he did Death Becomes Her.
We were talking about
one
that.
of my favorite movies.
Love Death Becomes Her.
Wow. Jeff, is yours obviously?
It's obviously The Fog, but I had to go on your your IMDb. Love Roller Boogie. I'm sorry.
I'm still pretty psyched.
Linda Blair. I know it's not a cinema, but it's Roller Boogie. If you've seen it, you know it. It's cheap. It's a horror movie in its own sort of way.
Right. I'm still pretty psyched you did Witch That Came From the Sea. Who came from the sea? Yeah. Sorry.
Well, and I think again, part of my satisfaction with all of this stuff is having taken movies that could have been just regular, ordinary, low budget movies, and trying to do something more with it. And it's like I tell film students whenever I talk to them, and they say, "Well, what's your advice?" And I say, "Well, there's 3 or 4, guidelines. One of which is never turn down any job. Take any job you can get. Never ask how much are you going to pay me, because that'll all come later. What you want is the job. But more importantly is always deliver 110%. And so that's something I always tried, even in the most inane script or whatever, was to try to, plus the film in some way, and find some way to teach myself how to make it look better. So, there are those films that you mentioned that, were hopefully better looking than they, I'd hate to say deserve to be, but
than the majority of the films comparable at the time.
Yes, exactly.
Something people never talk about is the casting of a cinematographer, and so obviously you start with John. You created a lot of work. How did, say, Steven first come in contact with your work, or how did Robert first come in? Was it a film you had made, or was it just through meeting people? I'm always curious.
That's interesting.
That is an interesting question.
Yeah, well, a lot of how you get work is networking,
right?
But the networking, which is not only just some guy who recommends you, but networking of the movie that you did, that somebody said, "Oh, that would be the good look for what I want to do. And in my case, because I'd been doing a lot of innovative kind of things, if they were venturing out into new territory, that fortunately I would get the phone call. And so I think that, but in the case of like Stephen, he had seen something I had done, Escape from New York or whatever. And in the case of Bob Zemeckis, he specifically mentioned Escape from New York. So, they look at something you've done and said, well, that would apply to my movie. And, I think that you get cast by the same way an actor does. They look at your last movie and say, oh, that's the way I want the character to be. Or they look through a bunch of movies and find the character, that they want portrayed by that particular actor.
Right.
So in the case of cinematography, it's the same kind of thing, that they look at films and say, I think that's the style. And quite consciously, sitting with Stephen on, I think it was Hook, which was the first time I worked with him as a director. We would run films, and he would say, "Okay, here's reel 2 of this. We'll just," and he'd have the projectionist paper that thing down to just a particular scene, because that was obviously the days before, we could run a Blu-ray or whatever. But also, he was very much about film on a screen, and so we would look at that, and then he would look at another sequence, and he'd say, I think this is the scene where, okay, now let's look at this other one. Okay, now this is how I see the scene where, and you would sort of get a vision in advance of what he was thinking of, and I would look at that and say, oh yeah, I see what they did, and so it gives you a little bit of a head start on creating a look, as opposed to, maybe looking at the first dailies and the director says, that's not what I was thinking. Let's try this, or can it be darker or whatever? So I think that's a great way to do it, is to reference other images. And it's not like you are stealing,
right?
Because and it's like actors getting typecast. It's kind of I guess a compliment, you might say, because for a director to say, oh, well, he did that character really well, and that's the character I see in my film, let's hire that actor. So now you have to recreate something you did before. Well, it goes, I think, for cinematography also. They liked a particular look, or I had done something that somebody else hadn't done before, and they wanted to go into that territory. So you get a call.
Is there anything any type of film or genre film you never got to take your hand to because you don't write the material, like a Western or?
Well, I got to do a little bit of a Western in Back to the Future 3, but,
of course, yeah.
But
and The Thing,
I would,
in its way,
exactly. But no, that's something I love. I really like period films, so I would love to do a real Western, and that's one of the ironic things I think about the film business in the studios. If you went to them previously and you said, well, I want to make a Western, they would say, well, nobody goes to see those anymore, And if you'd gone and said, well, I'd like to make a pirate movie, they'd have said, whoa, nobody goes to see pirate movies anymore. Right. Well, then you just make a good one, and everybody wants to see a Western, a pirate movie, whatever. So, I think that's one of the, ironic things about, the studios, is trying to convince them that you're not just going to make a pirate movie. you're going to make one that hopefully everybody will want to go see. And now they're going to go see the 5th pirate movie.
Right. And they just keep going.
So, guys, shall we move on to some of our favorite looking horror films?
Yeah, if we want to do a quick round table?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, we're obviously starting with influences. But I mean, I assume as your career goes on, you're also watching a lot of cinema around you, seeing what other people are making and directors. I don't know.
Yeah, because you have to sort of stay current with, what's the look, and I think that the changing technology really affects what you do. I mean, the fact that we're going into a serious digital revolution as opposed to an evolution, and the fact that film or digital is faster. In other words, more sensitive to light. So now you can shoot in environments that are a lot more lit by real light. City streets at night and things like that. Whereas in the earlier days, in the old days, even Escape from New York and so forth, everything you wanted to see had to be lit, and it created a real sort of effort and technique. So
we had to go to NASA and invent a lens.
Exactly.
Dear NASA.
Yeah, exactly.
Not easy.
So that's one of the things that's changing. I think the look, and not always to the positive. Sometimes it's easy to get a little bit lazy and say, well, we can shoot in here with all these fluorescents, and rather than saying, well, what's the best look for this particular scene or the movie. So you don't want to, just, get lazy and say, well, and as a lot of the producers and the studios and would like, which is, well, we don't need lights, then we don't need all that crew, then we,
right.
And so, it begins to affect what the movie looks like.
Well, then you lose what you were talking about, the essence of all the films we love, which is collaboration. If suddenly it's just a guy holding a camera and you've stripped away all the people around them, you've lost that problem-solving group.
Exactly. And now you're at the mercy of what is real life, which works for some kinds of movies.
Right.
If we go back to Truffaut movies. Yeah. But
it kills your options.
Yeah, exactly. And so being able to create the mood for a particular movie, for a particular scene, for a particular shot is sort of limited.
Mm.
Is there anything you've seen as of late that you liked the look of or appreciated? Anything that stood out to you in the last couple of years?
Well, I just recently went to see The Conjuring.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Love that movie.
I think that's probably one of the most successful recent horror films because it wasn't all about the gore. The remake of Halloween was.
What'd you think of that?
Was bloody. It was explicit.
Different.
Very violent.
As opposed to letting the audience get sucked into it. So The Conjuring, I thought, was very effective in building suspense and scaring us. I went to a screening with a regular audience as opposed to a preview or whatever. And, it's great to see the audience jump at the right time.
Yeah.
And the girlfriend grabs the guy, and says, and he says, it'll be okay, honey.
I saw guys jumping at that one.
We went to a press screening, and I was sitting there between Elric and Dave Parker.
Yeah, Matt.
And
they're all
Matthew
jumping.
Curry Holmes, and everybody was jumping.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It felt like a throwback. It felt like a classic. It felt like The Haunting or something, the original Haunting.
Exactly.
Classic.
So, I hold out some hope for the fact that there'll be, guys who will look at it and say, "Oh, that's how you build suspense: the slow camera move as opposed to handheld and jerky and so forth."
Wow. Hear that, James Wan? Dean Cundey likes
Yeah.
Think about it.
Were there any other ones like throughout your career, horror films particularly, that they came out something like The Shining or whatever, where you're like, oh wow, that's interesting. How'd they pull that off? Or things that
Yeah, I think The Shining is one, and I remember reading the book when it first came out, and it being, I think when you grow up making horror films, that it's hard to be scared because you can see the technique, you can see what's coming, and you can. There's certain things that if the director just sort of copies, tips his hand that this one is going to be a false scare. This one's a real one. This is just the way the actor is moving and looking and stuff like that. So, The Shining was a book that I read that was really scary. I remember specifically lying on my couch and I had, mistakenly left the front door open, and it was at night, and it was very. And I can't remember the sequence exactly, but it touched me as being, on the printed page, very evocative and scary. And, the movie was, likewise built this whole world and emotional, environment.
The cinematographer for Shining, John Alcott, ended up winning an Academy Award for Barry Lyndon, but I always thought The Shining was by far his best work.
Yeah.
Well, and they had to build the entire thing, right? Just because they couldn't light it in the traditional sense, because he's going on his little scooter all the way through.
I just love that he went from The Shining to Terror Train, and seriously, and he said in an interview or something like that. Well, he wanted the challenge of lighting in a train, and there was a lot of intricate things. I'm like, how did you go from Kubrick to David Copperfield slasher film? Anyways, but it's a good looking movie.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's sometimes the thing that is appealing. I've gotten interested recently in low budget films again because, the big giant $150, $200 million things, you're only a cog in the wheel.
That's true.
And with low budget films, indie films and so forth, you really get to be creatively involved with all of it, including working with the director, working with the actors, developing blocking on a scene and where's the camera go and the lighting. So I think that I can understand John Alcott going from a big Kubrick film, which I never worked with him, but I understand you'll do 50 takes or something.
Yes.
So it can get tedious to something that is energizing.
It's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, after 50 takes, like, screw this, I'm doing that movie on the train.
Right.
Call those people back about that train movie.
We lasted a whole hour without talking about Tom Atkins' mustache.
I know. Oh, my God.
Shooting with or without? You've had the experience. You're like the only person on earth who shot
shot
Tom Atkins with and without mustache. Which did you prefer?
It's one of those things I look at most fondly about my career is, sometimes they say, well, what's it like working with Steven Spielberg? And I say, no. Tom Atkins with and without his mustache.
Both. For those who don't know, Halloween 3 also is one of the films we're alluding to.
Yes.
Which is very much with mustache.
Fog without.
Yes. Escape from New York mustache.
Yes,
he was in that too.
Yeah.
Not a big role, but
yeah,
we know our Atkins.
Yeah, I'm sure he's listening and tweeting about it right now.
He loves us. He's like our biggest fan.
But so let's just talk about some of the visual. Do you want to build that into here or wait?
Yeah, I mean,
let's do it.
Yeah, I'd honestly I didn't really have time to think about this too distinctly, but just growing up and I don't want to seem obvious saying the films that Dean did with John because those are my obvious choices. But Suspiria, it's one of
I put that down.
Movies that you're just so obviously aware
colorful,
of everything you're seeing.
Well, Luciana Tivoli also did Tenebrae.
Okay,
which is another one that I just consider completely.
It's got that beautiful shot at the end with the woman getting her arm hacked off and just all the blood on that white wall.
Yes. I love the choice of he used. I always call it poster paint, but the blood color that they used, it's like just red paint. It's almost poetic.
Yeah.
It seems to be, and just from your perspective, it seems like he's going because he was never great with actors. It seems like he's almost going with color theory for the emotion. Like this will get the emotion.
Yeah.
Because the performers
Suspiria,
can.
Inferno, they're very they're almost like fairy tale comic books. Colorful, like Suspiria in particular. But Halloween, I'm just going to say, has a lot of color in it in particular. And I've read somewhere that John was a fan of Argento, or is a fan of Argento, and that Suspiria somewhat influenced.
We ran Suspiria, and because Deborah had said, that it was one of their favorite recent movies at the time. Wow. So we ran it and talked about it. So I think that it was definitely, if not a conscious influence, it certainly was. Yeah.
I think, just the colors pop in Halloween and Suspiria is just all about it.
That's the big difference between, I remember getting, I guess, the Divimax release of Halloween on Anchor Bay, where it completely lost that bluish tint. And you're like, wait a minute, I don't remember.
True thing. I know Halloween's been on Blu-ray before, but because it is not the one that you have supervised before on DVD, which has your oranges and blues and everything like that, I won't get the Blu-ray until they just announced the 35th anniversary, which you're on. And now I'm like, okay, finally I can get Halloween on Blu-ray, because I think the colors make a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And muting it and everything like that from what was on the last Blu-ray release,
You're a big sell on that, because we've all bought Halloween 35 freaking times.
They release it every year. It's like a yearly Halloween release.
I'm not buying it on Blu-ray again. Screw that. And they're like,
I think for your wallet, you should wait. Wait another 5 years.
Well, now I have to get it.
But the colors on Halloween 2, Halloween 3. Halloween 3 is very colorful.
Oh yeah, those masks
it's just
gorgeous.
The mask, the Santa Mira. There's the greens.
Atkins mustache.
There you go. We had to throw that in.
Beautiful.
I just think, we're talking visual and colors. Sometimes it's underrated. And even a movie like The Fog, which is but you just sat in on the transfer, you see where you can bring out the colors, but it's a dark movie. But you have the contrast of the fog, the dark ghosts in the white fog,
the red
blue
eyes,
fog, the red eyes, the everything. It's just, I don't know. Very
well, and that's one of the things that I've always sort of felt and say to film students and people who ask that one of the things I think a film needs contrast, and I say this to directors that I work with, contrast, and that doesn't mean from light to dark, the ratio of light and dark. It means from scene to scene. Some of them should be colorful, because you don't want the audience to be lulled into a sameness of visual. You want to make a statement about a particular scene, a particular shot, whatever it is. So that kind of color was one of the things that I consciously did.
Yeah. Thank you,
Elric.
I have a list. I would like to recite every title.
Let's hear it.
While you all listen to me.
Good Lord.
No. I'll fire off some of that. There's films that I've seen where the artistry is matched with Eyes Without a Face. Was one of the first times I saw a film where just the lighting was so poetic. It was pre-Tim Burton, and yet you could see where Edward Scissorhands seems like it entirely now comes from that film, and Eraserhead in the same way. Those two films. My favorite of Hammer was The Devil Rides Out. Is one of those films that I had never really thought much about, but it's a beautiful looking film. And then I wrote Le Diabolique. You remember that? Mm-hmm. That's a gorgeous film. And then there's the film Daughters of Darkness by Harry.
I love that movie.
Yeah, it's just one of those films that's kind of a routine vampire thing. Lesbian. They're in the middle of some hotel, and yet somehow the way that film looks, you're completely kind of pulled in with purely the visual storytelling again. Mm-hmm. And one film that I wanted, Night of the Hunter. I've got a lot of The Beyond, all these films, but there's two that I think are really one particularly I think doesn't get spoken about in terms of beauty, and that's Texas Chainsaw Massacre, because I think people write it off as it's realism. It was kind of like a newsreel footage.
Grainy.
There's a couple parts, but there's some shots on that absolutely from visual storytelling. The behind the seat where the couple are or the girl's on the seat and she starts walking and the camera follows them. Yeah. These little touches that I think are why the film succeeds. It pulls you in. I think again, like Fog, sense of place. Mm-hmm. Film has a sense of space and place that complete. And I think that film's deeply underrated. And then maybe my favorite of all time, just the way it looks, because it's hard to pull off horror in daytime. And I'd say Rosemary's Baby. I think the way that looks and the way his kind of new way of approaching at that point in history, just because he came from a different cinema, it's or Polanski anyway, as the director, it's so unique, and and you've had a couple of films where you had to scare people kind of in the daylight. Like The Thing has a lot of daytime shooting. I imagine that's a real challenge because dark is the easiest way to.
Well, and I think again it goes back to my statement about films needing contrast.
Right.
The contrast between a scene that's completely dark, and shadows and things like that, which the audience immediately associates with, the suspense, and sequences that are daylight, that throw you off. You're not expecting,
right.
that he's going to jump out from behind that building or something. So. Yeah, and it's harder because you often rely on the mood that darkness creates. We're naturally more afraid of stuff we can't see, and that happens at night, presumably, than we are in bright daylight. There's something sort of safe about bright daylight. So creating the suspense in it is harder, and I'd agree with Rosemary's Baby. It became about the characters and the story at that point.
Yeah,
Rebekah.
Well, I've realized most of mine are international, so apparently I have a thing for foreign cinematography. So the number one on my list is one that I don't think anyone has ever pointed out. His name is Shu, and I'm probably going to mispronounce this. It's Japanese, Momosi. Tokyo Gore Police, Meatball Machine, and Mutant Girl Squad. I know these sound like total throwaway films. I'm not kidding. They are the most beautifully shot films. And I love what he does. And he does these uber gory Japanese films. And they're modern day. I mean, Tokyo Gore Police was maybe 3 years ago.
They're very poppy colors, right? They're quite bright.
Very popped colors. Everything is poetic. Even just the falling blood. It's not like you're not looking at blood spurting from far away. You're looking at tiny droplets hitting the ground in slow motion. And it's just the most poetically shot films ever. And they're so brutally gory with these just campy plots. But I absolutely love them because of that. I also put in Chung Hoon Chung, who does all of Chan-wook Park's films. Oh, yeah. Stoker, Old Boy, Thirst. I just absolutely love his work. Let's see here. Irreversible is Benoit Debie.
Yeah, he just shot Spring Breakers.
Yeah, he did Spring Breakers, Enter the Void, Calvare, also known as The Ordeal. And then I love Gene Rollins films. I don't even know who his cinematographer was, but in that same regard, I'll also show in things like Vampiros Lesbos. I always love the cinematography on. The one that I put down that is American, I think, is, and I'm probably going to say his name wrong, Michael Saracen, who did Angel Heart.
Yeah,
Saracen did Angel
also
Heart.
New Zealander.
Oh, see, he's not American. And then I also wrote down Michael Goy, who is doing The American Horror Story, which I think has just been absolutely beautiful shot.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes it. That's for sure, the way it looks.
Yeah, and I love the variance. So you talked about the contrast. I love how, especially this past season with Asylum, how one episode will be dark, shadowy, low-key, and then the next one will just be bright and sunny and have musical numbers, and it works. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Did you prep anything, John?
I did. Well,
okay.
I you know what? I was thinking about one in particular, and then two more came to mind, so I only have three. Okay. I'm going to say, just like you did, I mean, I would cite all these early John Carpenter films. I mean, they just were most influenced. But I'm going to cite three from the same director, and that would be Brian De Palma's Carrie, The Fury, and Dressed to Kill. Visually, those movies are really style over substance. I can watch the Carrie prom scene over and over and over again. There's slow motion, there's crane shots, there's split screen, there's wide destruction of people, there's lighting, there's fire, there's just so much going on.
Yeah.
And a Cinderella story on top of it, and Pino Donaggio's score.
Yeah.
You visually are really taken, and I just think that is just an utmost beautiful scene in horror films. The Fury, which was his follow-up to Carrie, it's all telekinetic and crazy. I mean, there's amusement park rides destroying. There's people spinning it around in the air with blood everywhere. There's a lot of, like, again, influenced by Hitchcock, which Brian De Palma, admits that he did. You can tell, but there's just so much going on. You're just and it's all camera work. You know, the story is kind of, you know, illogical and convoluted, but you're just like, wow. And then Dressed to Kill, there's many scenes in it, but there are 2 scenes, one in the museum with Angie Dickinson walking around where there's no dialogue. It's just music and a camera.
I always show that for visual storytelling.
And she's cruising a guy, and the guy's cruising her and everything. And then at the end, there's a shower scene. Again, same thing. No dialogue, but it's music. There's Nancy Allen. She's scared. She's looking in the mirror. There's a razor. There's a shoes. Like, there's all these cuts, and I just think it's beautiful.
Yeah.
I think that those are just, you know, again, on top of the Carpenter stuff, I mean...
Well, and similar to what they were going for with the start of Halloween, it's the attempt at pure cinema, that thing that isn't influenced by theater, you know, where the camera is an active participant and the visuals are what tell the story.
I feel like De Palma's films, I just recently watched Body Double, which just came out on Blu-ray. Same thing. And it's all...
It's insane.
It's all camera moves and shots and stuff like that, too. Yeah. And I just think that, you know, when we were... when the topic of visual in horror films would come up, I was like, all right, well, I got to bring up Brian De Palma. I mean,
when De Palma's on the show, I'm going to mention that.
Oh, okay, good.
If you're listening, Brian. Next time you're out west.
We're not going to talk about Dressed to Kill that episode, though.
What do you mean? I always talk. Last year I went as the female version of Michael Caine.
Did you really?
He did. He walked around Los Angeles.
I went all out. I went all out. I'll send you a photo.
I do want to see
the razor and the sunglasses.
Bobby.
Bobby.
That's awesome. So yeah, those were, I mean, you know, we mentioned Argento films and he should be, you know, but, you know, I love all the other ones that are kept like, no offense, I haven't heard of the Japanese ones and some of the ones there. And the stuff that you brought up too is really good.
Did you? There's so many though. I mean,
I just brought up Suspiria.
I would go so far as to say though that horror, because it's always pushed into the category away from mainstream. If you look at that seems to be where most innovation. I mean, we could have talked about phantasm films, Cosgrove using dark, you know, in the dark, the first one especially, or Nightmare on Elm Street using. When you talk about contrast, there's a series that took from between reality and the surreality, just that fine border between the two. It didn't make a major difference. It was like it's just a shift to the left, you know?
Or even the experimental stuff that tends to emerge in horror, like Elias Mirhage, Begotten. I always look at as beautiful, beautiful cinematography. So experimental, you couldn't pull it off in another genre.
Yeah.
You know, you saw The Conjuring, and it just made me think that one underrated film that James Wan did that I think is really beautiful to look at, it a little on the hokey side, but it's very cinematic, is Dead Silence.
Yeah, I love it.
I think that is such a trippy film, and the way that things dissolve into others. I mean, you could. It's funny because I really love
like old Universal monster feel to it. Maybe a little Hammer as well.
It's and you can see. I'll tell you, to rewatch Dead Silence now after seeing The Conjuring and Insidious, you can see where Dead Silence is totally Saw meets The Conjuring, Insidious, and then Crazy, and then you went to Insidious, and then you kind of like made it more palatable for the The Conjuring. But, but I think James Wan has a great visual sense. I
think he's also gotten better with each film.
Well, it'll be interesting because he's now going to do a fairly mainstream Fast and
Furious. You know, I saw that. I was like, oh, I just want to see Insidious too. like, can't you just keep doing those? Like,
we'll see.
But you know,
all right. Well, we're going to stick around. If you want to stick around with us, Jeff, we're going to stick around and talk about what we've seen the last week. But we've taken a lot of Dean's time up, and we just want to thank you so much for coming down and talking to us. It's been a tremendous thrill, and obviously, like we
fascinating.
And we get The Fog. We want everyone to rewatch The Fog because there's another film that will probably have a major reappraisal.
And Death Becomes Her.
Oh, I
swear. Rewatch that movie.
You know what?
So good.
I hope someone at Universal's listening, or we can eventually get it. That was issued on DVD. Full frame, which is terrible, and then it's a widescreen movie. And
Shout Factory, get on it!
I know,
Dean's coming for you.
Let me do the commentary on that one. I will praise that thing to high heavens.
Oh, same here.
So thank you so much for coming, Dean. We appreciate it, and pick up The Fog.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Wow, how cool is that?
That was awesome.
I was going to say, it's no problem to geek out because Dean Cundey was just terrible.
Now we can get full geeked out.
Right.
If we wanted to. I actually didn't get to say my favorite movie, but mine of his was Back to the Future, for sure.
Okay.
Back to the Future is in my top 5 of all time.
Yeah.
Halloween's in my top 5 horror movies of all time for sure.
I will say that,
about Without Warning, because it's
a
DVD release.
Right. Well, and believe me, fans ask us, and we know.
Jeff, are you guys putting out Without Warning? Because I really like that film, and I own a shitty bootleg copy.
Listen,
what about Roller Boogie? You should look at that for Shout Factory.
I believe me. We would let.
Let's grill Jeff. Everyone get into
it. Yeah, no. When we were looking at his IMDb, I was like, oh yeah, Without Warning. And then when I saw Roller Boogie, I was like, oh.
Yes,
that's what
he did in between Halloween and the Fog.
He did Ilsa and the Oil Sheiks, guys. He shot an Ilsa film.
Right.
That is awesome. That is totally awesome.
Yeah, that's his filmography is really intimidating. I mean, besides your favorite films, it's then some of the best films. Like
I know.
The mainstream biggest movie.
And working with the best directors, it's just, and we could say this, my God, the guy was so down to earth.
Oh yeah.
Just so laid back. Yeah. Just humble pie. I mean, that's
see how cool you can be when you're successful.
I know.
See how cool you can be.
Someday.
No, that was really cool. That's a real highlight.
So what did you guys do this week? I feel like I haven't talked to either of you guys in so long because I've been moving. I've been like off the chart.
I've been moving off the chart.
Yeah.
I saw a couple of movies that I really wanted to talk about, and literally a couple, just 2. I finally saw, they showed The Battery over at the Cinefamily.
Right.
That is
don't give any spoilers.
So
don't say too much.
It's not about the zombies. There's your spoiler.
You've seen it already?
Mm-hmm. I've seen large chunks of it. They sent us.
You have to see the whole thing.
They sent us. I can't even call it a screener copy. They sent us I'll call it a cutter, where you get 20-minute chunks.
That doesn't count. You have to watch it all in one sitting as one film.
Really?
But AJ Bowen introduced it. He talked about it a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And through that
on Twitter, he talked about it a month ago, and I've been interested since then.
And Ryan Turk talked about it on our panel this weekend.
Yes, that's true. So Cinefamily asked AJ to introduce it, so I went with him, even though it was a midnight screening, and I'm a baby and can't sleep.
Somehow you stayed up that late.
I stayed up for this one, and I'm so glad I did because, again, it's more of it's technically it's a zombie movie, but that's so incidental. It's really more of a road trip movie, but with 2 guys that used to be baseball players before everything went to hell. And it's just the rich relationship between these 2 and the way that everything kind of unfolds. It's just really amazing storytelling. And the thing is, it was only made for $6,000, $6,000.
Yeah.
And
awesome.
Again, I don't want to give anything away.
Yeah, I don't want to know.
The tone is really fun. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of great.
I don't even watch trailers, Jeff, anymore. I'm
that
off the grid when it comes.
I'm that way too. Yeah, I
like
it.
A surprise.
I totally get it.
The lead actor in it is also the guy that wrote, directed, and edited it. So it's just really impressive how much talent went into this with next to no money. And I mean, the only thing I'll say is, for example, there's an 11-minute take in the movie that is so goddamn impressive. And again, I just when you look at the kind of stuff that people are doing at a low budget, and you see this, an example of a great character movie that was made for $6,000, there's no excuse. Seriously. Mm-hmm. So I kind of put that's already in my top 3 of the year. It'll be next to Conjuring and Maniac.
Nice.
The Battery. And the other film that I just wanted to mention, I have this weird thing where, movies will come out on DVD that I'm familiar with and that I like, but I'm not sure if I need to own it. But then I find out it goes out of print or something, and then I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I buy it? I have to find it.
I do the same thing.
Totally
it becomes an obsession then.
So this one for this week, the one that I've been on the hunt for is Dark Night of the Scarecrow, but the Blu-ray. Oh, yeah. Because the Blu-ray is an amazing transfer.
I have it.
You do?
Yeah, Dave loves that film.
Yeah, I haven't seen it in years. It's a great one of the best made for TV horror movies. But I heard through the grapevine that, hey, you got to check out the Blu-ray because it's better than the DVD transfer. I put it on par with Town That Dreaded Sundown in terms of quality of the way it looks.
Yep.
It looked way too good. Town That Dreaded Sundown, it never looked.
I'm sorry.
Even in its original print, it never looked.
We're
that
sorry.
good.
We'll make sure to scratch up our next older prints.
But Dark Night of the Scarecrow is when the postman forces the town into.
No. That's no.
What's that one?
Dark Knight of the Scarecrow stars Larry Drake.
Yes.
that's the same one.
I know it aired on NBC.
Oh yeah, the Postman.
No, it's the Postman. Yeah,
Charles Durning.
Charles Durning tells everyone to go after him.
Yeah, Larry Drake is kind of the mentally retarded guy that has a.
I've only seen it on VHS.
I had never seen it until Fright Rags put out a Dark Night of the Scarecrow T-shirt, and then my husband went ape shit and bought the shirt, and we had to watch the movie while he was wearing the shirt.
Yeah,
it was just.
Well, what's funny is
crazy night.
over the years between the shirt and that imagery, like I got an idea in my head of what I thought it was, which is a traditional, like I thought it was a killer scarecrow, whatever.
Right.
It's not that at all.
No.
It's actually way more impressive
Yep.
because it's dare I say, a little bit more of a psychological kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
You know? But yeah, I mean, and I think it came back in print, which is how I was able to get the Blu-ray. I'm not positive. But if you've never seen it, Dark Night of the Scarecrow, made for TV movie. And yeah, amazing transfer on Blu-ray. And you know what? I'll bring it up. I'm excited because you guys at Scream Factory are testing the waters by putting out a double feature of made-for-TV horror, which I'm really excited about. I think that's a cool untapped market.
You know what?
What's the first double
first
bill?
one? It's in December on DVD. It'll be The Initiation of Sarah from 1978 with Morgan Fairchild.
By Tom Holland.
Oh,
he did the screenplay. Yeah.
Oh, we may need him for a commentary.
I'll take care of that.
Duly noted. And a movie called Are You in the House Alone? Also from 1978.
I love that movie.
Kathleen Beller and Blythe Danner of all people, and Dennis Quaid.
Yeah.
And you know the thing is that, we'd love it to do well. We'll price it, if affordably. It's on DVD. Don't expect a whole lot in extras. We're trying to reach out to talent. We're already finding that that's to be a challenge. But if this does well, if it succeeds, there's just so many other made-for-TV movies out there that the studios have that we might be able to get.
You need to get Crowhaven Farm.
Listen, before that, I want Hotline with Linda Carter or Midnight Offerings with Melissa Sue Anderson.
Wow.
I have a bootleg of Midnight Offerings.
I have a bootleg too.
Yeah.
Anyways, but the thing is that TV movies typically do not sell very well on Blu-ray or DVD.
Yeah.
Dark Night of the Scarecrow actually is in a rare exception to the rule. I know what those numbers are, but
because it had Dr. Giggles.
Right, exactly.
Everyone loves Dr. Giggles.
A great cover.
No, but I think they did a good job marketing it. I think it was VCI or whatever like that. They did a good job, but typically they don't do well. But we've heard a lot of requests. We're going to try it out. We're going to keep our fingers crossed, and then we'll see from there. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Cool.
All right.
Yeah.
What'd you watch this week?
Well, the big thing that I caught up on, it's been way overdue, was The Purge, because I was in San Diego on hotel, and I found I was living like the 1%, and then I watched the movie about the 99 versus the 1%. I was like flipping through, I'll watch this from the home. It was really interesting. For one, it wasn't as terrible as people made it sound out to me, but it also isn't a good film. It's a fantastic, like one of the best premises I've seen in years.
No spoilers. I want to see it.
I won't spoil it, but what I will say is just you don't ever care about the people, and that's the fundamental problem with the film, because they instantly make Ethan Hawke this pretty unlikable character in an unlikable world, in an unlikable family.
It's very Ayn Randian.
Yeah, but that said, it's fascinating. And my whole time I was watching, I was going, well, there's nothing inherently wrong with the way it's made necessarily. And there is something I would say right now, but I won't, because that would spoil thing about just that I think could have made it a better film. What I will say, it gave me in my mind, a great idea for a sequel, which nothing to do with the family, won't ruin it. But I was thinking the problem with The Purge is it's a night where, you can purge. Right. People can go out and do this thing, and it helps society. I was thinking to myself, what a more interesting idea based on this would be, in the sequel, when you turn of age, you have to purge. So every person has to choose a person once, because then you're all complicit in murder at some point. Therefore, as a society, you're all in on it. And to have somebody coming of age who doesn't want to do this, having to make that weighty decision, would be fascinating. And plus, you know what? The pacifists will happen to them. Anyone who doesn't want to do it will be the people who first get taken out. And I thought it would make a fascinating sequel, because he has a young son who's not into it. That's the only plot. And I was like, you could have this kid grow up and have to do it. That was the one thing that was spinning through my mind the whole time. I hope someone listens to that and takes that idea, and I make no money off it. I don't care. I just want to see that movie. It's the kind of guy I am. But it's not a terrible... I think it got a bad rap as being a terrible film, and I think the reason it got that was because the idea is so good.
It didn't get a bad rap. I mean, it made a ton.
It made
but that meant nothing. It was... Everyone I know didn't like it.
To me, it said Redbox, and that's
it
where,
does.
Exactly.
That's where.
But it's still put another wing on Jason Blum's house.
Yeah,
but it's interesting, and it's worth seeing. I would say it's worth seeing for that reason alone, to see where maybe it doesn't completely hit. But it's an interesting concept.
I'm bummed because, as we mentioned on the panel, I just feel like it took a little bit of the wind out of Your Next, which is obviously the better movie.
But hopefully not. There's still, we don't know. I'm seeing all the posters everywhere around town, so I'm excited.
I hope.
The other two I thought were interesting, and they'll be very brief. Friday 13th, Part 6, a couple nights ago, just because we saw Part 7 in the theater a couple weeks ago, and it was what I did think about is the film itself. Oh, no, the reason was because I was at Jump Gut, and Tom McLaughlin was there with Joe Madry, and they're outside, and I saw Tom, and I thought, I wonder I forget which one he made, and I went home and watched it. The thing about it, I think it has the best kills of the whole franchise. I think the kills are so fun and inventive, and yet the film, the story, is one of the weakest. Like, the actual plot of what's happening. But the kills are so fun. Oh, they're so fun. The most
fun in the series.
And there's a scene where I wanted to take a photo of it when it happened, but all the little kids are in bed. They're all and the one of them's reading Jean-Paul Sartre's No Exit. it shows all the kids book, and one of them's sleeping there with No Exit before Jason comes in. I was like, that's something I never even picked before. And it had a good sense of humor, but I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And then the other thing I watched last night was, and this is related to Amityville 2, which I am going to rename this. Amityville 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. That film had so many movies in it.
Yeah.
I couldn't even believe it.
The incest for the demons.
I love the incest stuff.
I got to tell you, I've seen our Blu-ray check disc of it because it's coming out on October 1st. It looks great. Yeah. We had a lot of great interviews. We lucked out in interviews. We had the mother, Rutania Aldo. We had the daughter, Diane Franklin.
The mother who talks right at camera every time.
Yes, exactly. Right we have Andrew Prine, who played, I think, the priest or one of them. We have Tommy Lee Wallace talking about, he wrote the film. Like, there's a lot of fun stuff in there, and the majority of the extras of the Amityville trilogy Blu-ray set are devoted to 2 because we knew that 2 has this batshit crazy.
It's crazy.
Like, oh my God, how did you make a movie like that?
Well, look, because it's about the actual, kind of about the actual family. So I'm watching with my friend, and we get to the part where the murders happen, and I literally, it was late at night, so he was kind of in and out, and I literally felt, the movie's about 10. And the murders start. I go, it must have been 2 hours. I just watched a 2-hour movie, and then literally a whole new movie starts,
totally.
Which is a demonic possession movie.
Totally.
And my mind just was like, wow, and then another movie. But all the stuff with the actual makeup and the creature effects, all the stuff with what's the character, the boy, the son. He's fantastic. And performance-wise too, he's genuinely fantastic throughout. So I actually had a lot of fun watching. I was really surprised how many different directions it went. It wasn't the movie I remembered.
For fans, we have a huge article on Amityville 2 in issue 325, including a big article with Diane Franklin.
Is that the one with Burt Young? The interview? I remember reading that.
Is that coming out soon?
It's already been out. It's been out a month.
Okay. Also, Burt Young was in a totally different movie than the rest. What he was saying about actors,
right?
Like he was always, you could see him always going to, I'm gonna go to a dark place.
I'm gonna go into the living room.
The interviews with Rutania and Diane are very fascinating, just talking about just the whole thing. They're good sports.
But it was fun. It was a lot of fun, and so I would definitely get one of my dreams you've missed because you're not here every week with us, which you should be, Jeff, is that I want to watch all of them in 6 days. I wanted to do it in summer, but I can't find half of them.
I've got a couple. Rob's got all of them.
Well, I've made 2. So I'm ready for 3.
3's fun because 3 has Meg Ryan and Aunt Becky from Full House.
I just want to get to the time travel one. Get me to the time travel one. But anyway, that's my week.
Cool. So I spent chunk of my week was getting ready for Scare LA because I was on like a couple panels there, several with Rob, and it was a good time. The con was a lot different from most horror cons in that it wasn't a horror con; it was a haunted house con. But they had a lot of cool stuff there. It was fun to walk around, and I enjoyed it a lot.
Did you see the films play?
I didn't, actually, because at the same time that the films were playing, I was teaching a class on marketing indie horror films with Ryan Turek. Okay, cool. But I heard my film playing next door. Okay, good. And I had to stop the class and go like, everybody, that's my film. Yeah, and then we continued on. So
glad to know they played.
They did. So, but the thing that I watched this week, because as you guys know, I seek out the forbidden in that which I'm not supposed to see. So this week I watched Cry Baby Lane. Which is a film that ran on Nickelodeon in the 90s and was banned. And it has never been released to anything. They've screened it once more on Nickelodeon. They did like a comeback showing a couple of years ago, but they had to play it late at night because it'd been banned again. And it's about this guy who gave birth to Siamese twins, and one was evil and one was good, and they cut them down the middle, and you find out that the evil one is still alive and terrorizing the town. And it is completely, or I guess it's his ghost, because they unearth his corpse at one point. And I can't believe that ever ran on Nickelodeon. It's such a fun film, though. So I have a bootleg.
Yeah, it was a documentary.
It's totally a documentary.
Sounded good. Sounded like a good
Nickelodeon's known for their documentaries.
Yeah, I like that.
And then, so I watched that, and I'll have to let you guys borrow my bootleg. And then the other thing that I'm kind of psyched about, last week we talked about Demon Lover Diary, which is a totally obscure film.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I have a copy on the way to my house right now.
Oh, good.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty psyched about that.
Yeah, it's one of the best documentaries I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the movie even exists, the movie that the guys are making, Demon Lover something. I don't know what the actual name of it was.
Yeah.
I think it exists, but it's probably not very good. But it's just, you haven't missed it. It was a 2-person documentary made in the 70s or like 1980 behind the scenes of a horror film, but nothing to do with the studio. So it's like the first example of somebody making a behind the scenes.
Oh, interesting.
And it's got some moments that are just hilarious. Like just kind of like American movie mixed with a great behind the scenes. But it's very real, and they're trying to get gas money to get to set, and one of them like almost cuts his thumb off at one point, and you're right there with these two people.
And so
I've never seen a bad copy of it.
It never got released, and so I don't want to say how I procured it, but I have procured it. So
cool. Yeah, I'd watch it again.
Jeff, cool. Have you seen anything of interest in the last couple weeks?
Of course. I'll mention 3 briefly. One is going to be met with some controversy, though.
Controversy
from you in particular. The ones that are non-controversial. I have to do a Scream Factory plug. Last week, I saw our Blu-ray check disc of Prince of Darkness, John Carpenter's Prince. I got to tell you, I've seen this movie several times, and watching it on Blu-ray, we talked earlier with Dean about colors and things resonating. On Blu-ray, Prince of Darkness really comes alive. It was kind of unsettling. I watched it on Monday night before I went to bed, and I was scared. I was scared. I've seen the movie several times. There was something about the high definition of the, especially the bloody lady's face at the end and a whole bunch of stuff where I was just like, wow, okay, this really made a difference. So Prince of Darkness, there's my Scream Factory plug. I watched this random 1980 lesbian stalking thriller called Windows. Have you ever heard of this?
No, but I'm writing it down.
Okay. Well, this has Elizabeth Ashley stalking Talia Shire, who played Rocky's wife, who is mopey and dopey. I don't know why the lesbian is attracted to her or whatever like that. But
doesn't she run a pizza place in Hollywood now? I swear she does.
She's Jason
funny.
Schwartzman's, the guy from Rushmore. That's his mom.
Okay.
Talia Shire's Jason Schwartzman's.
I'll look into this and get back to it. But I've heard rumors. She runs a pizza place.
The movie is directed by the guy who did some of the cinematography, I think, for The Godfather, whatever. Anyways, it was the very first film of 1980, January. And it was met with a lot of anti-gay controversy because it was that and the William Friedkin movie, Cruising, that were both like, well, you're making gays look bad and everything like that. Windows is just ridiculous. It's boring, it's dumb, and it's also over the top. And those are the kind of movies that I just sit there and I scratch my head and I go, wow, this made it into theaters and everything.
Where'd you find it?
It's on TV? It's on MOD DVD, meaning it's not even on a real DVD. Like MGM just kind of burned it and everything.
They make a copy just for you.
Exactly. I just kind of, okay, so now the controversial one.
Oh boy.
So I saw The Conjuring.
Oh, and you didn't like it?
Listen.
Here's 2 weeks in a row.
Hold on, I'm going to get Dean Cundey back on.
Here's the deal.
He didn't like it.
Here's the deal. I loved Insidious. I was so petrified and scared by Insidious. It takes a lot for me to be in a theater to put hands over my eyes and get cowering in my seat. And that's what I was with Insidious completely. So I went in, I think, with big expectations for The Conjuring. I thought The Conjuring was a good movie. So I don't want to say it was bad, but it didn't scare me. It just didn't scare me.
But that's not a bad thing. That's just a personal thing. I think that's not a bad thing. Like what scares us is always very personal.
It was, again, well acted, well directed. Won't take anything away from that. But I was like,
Yeah, it's really interesting. This is the conversation I've been having now that it's been several weeks, is because I know people that I liked Insidious a lot. Like I really, really liked it, but I loved Conjuring. I felt like Insidious was the stepping stone to the movie he wanted to make. But I've also had conversations with people that think the complete opposite. They're like, I liked Insidious way more. Like, I'm not going to name names, but
I felt like the Insidious was more over the top than The Conjuring. The Conjuring is a lot more even keeled and I think therefore more palatable for mainstream. But I think I just was taken by Insidious.
Right.
I also think some people aren't scared of period pieces as much as they are contemporary films.
That's
because
true.
Insidious is where you are right now. People around you could happen in your apartment, whereas when you watch a period piece, you go, oh, that happened to them back then.
Yeah, maybe.
But, I mean, subconsciously. You know?
Maybe.
But it's good to see a film like that still doing so well.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, no. I mean,
I
like
want to cheer
I
him on.
Yeah.
And even cooler because you know there's another Insidious. I mean, the cool thing, you watch Conjuring and go, this is so great. Hey, I only have to wait a couple of months and I get to see another one.
Exactly. I get another one.
Yeah.
It's pretty damn cool. I mean, I'm excited about that. And yeah.
Rebekah,
Okay,
you have any
kids,
news?
I do. Well, the big news this week was Karen Black passed away, which was very sad.
So sad.
It's very sad to see her go.
Very, very sad.
She's fighting. I remember they had that campaign for funds to help her fight cancer, and it seemed very hopeful for a while. So it is kind of a bummer to hear that.
So also up this week, we had some photos from Old Boy released. I'm kind of excited to see it. Rob shaking his head. Also this week, John Russo has done a Kickstarter for a Midnight remake. We'll see how that
John
one
Russo,
goes.
as in the Night of
The Living Dead writer.
The guy who just makes $1 any way he can off the franchise.
Yeah, I've seen him at more conventions.
No, but I mean, seriously, you read all the books, just like, and he re-released the colorized version at some point, right? It's like...
So ABCs of Death released the full roster for ABCs of Death 2. It included the guy who directed Manborg. Don't even get me started on how I hate it when people applaud bad movies just for being bad.
Is Manborg bad?
I heard it was fun. I
haven't seen it.
It's
that.
It's a bad. They made a bad movie intentionally, and that always irks the shit out of me because if you have enough money to make a movie, God damn it, at least try your best.
Did they have enough money? I guess so.
Again, Battery, $6,000. They made a great movie.
But they announced that they always do the one letter that the fans at home can submit, and then they pick the one to go in. So this round it's going to be M, and one of the judges is Brian.
Collins?
Yeah. So Brian Collins, Mike Gingold from Fango. So
I'm definitely making one. I'm saying that right now. 100%. I will make an M.
So are you going murder?
I think we should.
Or
I think Killer POV
monster?
should make an M.
I like it. I'm not
going to say what it is, but I think we should.
And then the thing that I'm most excited about, they announced that Witching and Bitching is going to be playing at Fantastic Fest.
Ooh.
So I cannot wait to see that movie. I've decreed it last week on FEARnet, but Alex de Iglesias is my favorite director.
Yeah.
I'm saying it. I'm putting it out there. So
I have one bit of news I wanted to add, and it's a shout out, but a shout out to our previous guest, Scott Reynolds, who's on Dexter. He just started this week on The Following season 2.
Fuck yeah. On that note,
you can improve it.
WGN, which previously WGN had previously been kind of known for just doing like really crappy reruns and things like that, like really just, milking syndication for all it's worth. They just contracted their own show called Salem. So apparently horror TV is where it's at.
Oh, you want to know? I saw a trailer for something that just looked... Well, sorry if you worked on that. Bloody awful. As they say in New Zealand, bloody awful. It was the Headless Horseman TV show.
I heard about this.
I just saw the trailer and I just like, oh man, it's just like tapping anything you can. And I think the concept of that could be really cool, but the trailer just to me looked really, really weak. Like you could not pay me to watch that.
I'm anxious to see how Salem does.
If you're out there.
I'm that way about the trailer for Carrie. So
I am too.
I've heard such bad things.
I can't deal with it.
It just is the same thing. It's
people know how much I love that movie. I'm like, I'm not seeing it in the theater. It looks like a CW episode. I refuse to do it.
Which is shocking because of who directed it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought she would do something so edgy.
Kimberly
Pierce, I thought would do something so edgy.
I swear, everybody was like bated breath waiting for the female director to do something great in the horror industry. And it's just...
I mean, the first teaser trailer is great, but then the trailer...
Full trailer, you see the whole movie.
Yeah,
my friend next to me and The Conjuring was like, I don't need to see the movie. I'm like, well, I'm not going to see it. I mean, it's just...
I remember back when they originally talked about that film, they said it was going to be a found footage film. I remember, and then it became, it has elements of found footage. I almost wish they did, though, so it would be a different movie.
Yeah, different movie.
I don't want to see the same film.
Well, I think it was news last week, but they, what's her name, the little girl, admitted that they did shoot a lot of new stuff. And I heard a lot of it is with Julianne Moore to beef up her role a little bit more.
Really?
That's
always
called
a bad
studio involvement. Yeah. Like they shot the film and then the studio came in and said, we need more Julianne Moore.
Well, I mean, but there is...
I'm using Dean Cundey's voice. He's no longer with us. But we need more close-ups.
There's a difference between reshoots and like adding stuff, though. So I don't know. We'll see if that helps.
It's going to be a Redbox for me, and I just leave it at that.
I'm with you. I'll watch it on Redbox with you a year and a half from now.
Exactly.
I'll see you there.
I do have to say, I did see Frankenstein's Army this week.
Oh, yeah,
that was another one. I wish it had not been in found footage because the monsters in it were just like freaking awesome. But the problem with found footage is when you see a cool monster in found footage, you have to have the character run the other way. So you don't see anything for any length of time. True. But what's there is awesome. They should have done it differently, though.
All right.
So
do you guys remember when we were all hanging out and talking with Dean Cundey? Remember that? That was pretty cool, right?
That was so cool.
Is it just me or that was pretty cool, right?
I have to say, while we've been on air, I just texted my mom and said, I just interviewed the guy who shot Jurassic Park. And she wrote back and was like, whoa. And my mom doesn't text. So
wow. That's how impressed she was.
Of her
it's pretty cool.
Yeah. Nice 25th, for our 25th episode.
And you know he's going to go home and tell Spielberg about this. That's the crazy thing. He's going to be like, I was on Killer POV. And Spielberg's like, how do I get in on that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to say thank you, Rob, for making that happen because sometimes you don't know how we get these guests, but Rob, I've been asking him a lot since he mentioned this could happen, and I was like, oh my God.
I've been trying for months. So this is the week that it happened.
Sometimes Rob needs a little silent applause from home.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm not going to finish that we are, by the time you listen to this,
it
will have been Rob's birthday, which in 2 hours.
I'm already getting East Coast texts.
Happy birthday, Rob.
Happy birthday to Rob.
Happy birthday.
It has been a pleasure doing this show with you.
Yes. And if any of you guys are listening to this on Friday morning, please come by the Holly Shorts panel, which was coordinated by FEARnet, and we'll have me on it.
Cool.
Yay.
And then, we'll see you for Rob's real birthday soon.
Yeah.
if you know us.
That's the party.
You want to put us out?
What's that?
For your birthday. Send us out of here.
Bye, guys.
Poetic.
Love it.